The call came in at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was already at my desk. Coffee going cold beside me, spreadsheet open, trying to fix a $340,000 discrepancy before the 8 a.m. board call. My phone lit up, mom calling, I almost didn't answer. I told myself I'd call back after the meeting, that something made me pick up. Honey, your father and I wanted to let you know. We're at the airport. I stared at my screen. What? Why? Your brother's anniversary trip. We told you about this months ago. Cancun. 10 days. I hadn't forgotten. What I'd forgotten was that it was this week. Okay, I said slowly. Have a good trip. We will. Oh, and Lily, could you transfer the last installment before we board? The resort needs the final payment by noon. $2,300. That was the last installment, the last of many. I remember thinking, I'll deal with how I feel about this later. I transferred the money. I went back to my spreadsheet, I got through the board call, and then, somewhere around 10:15, I stood up to get a glass of water and the floor came up to meet me. I woke up in the ICU at St. New, Michael's hospital in Toronto, with an IV in my arm and a nurse I'd never met holding my wrist, checking my pulse like I was something fragile she was afraid of breaking. "There she is," she said quietly. "You're okay, you're safe." I wasn't sure I believed her. The doctor, Chen, who had kind eyes and a directness I immediately respected, told me I'd collapsed from a combination of severe exhaustion, dangerously high blood pressure, and what he called a hypertensive episode. Basically, my body had been running at 110% for so long that it finally just stopped, sent in its resignation, without notice. "Is there someone we can call?" he asked. I gave him my parents' number. Habit. The nurse tried twice. No answer. They were probably boarding. She tried my brother next. His number was my emergency contact backup. It rang through to voicemail. They ended up calling my manager, Patricia, who was at my bedside within 40 minutes, still in her coat, cheeks red from running from the parking garage. She held my hand and didn't say anything for a while, just sat there. That small act of showing up felt like more than I could process. I don't remember much from the first 2 days. I remember the sound of the monitors. I remember being cold. I remember a nurse named Deb who checked on me more often than she probably needed to and always squeezed my shoulder on the way out. I remember thinking, my parents don't know where I am. And then the quieter, more honest thought underneath it, they didn't ask. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. And the context is 12 years long. My name is Lily. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, the middle child of 3, though you'd never know it from how the roles were assigned in our house. My older sister moved to Vancouver when she was 22 and more or less checked out of family obligations the moment she crossed the Rockies. My younger brother, Ryan, was and still is the one my parents built their world around. Golden doesn't quite cover it. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just trying to stay warm. I was the responsible one, the one who stayed close, the one who answered the phone. After university accounting degree, University of Waterloo, graduated with distinction, I got a job at a mid-sized financial firm downtown Toronto. I worked hard, I got promoted. I made decent money for someone my age, which in Toronto meant I was just barely covering rent on a one-bedroom in Leslieville and putting away a small amount each month into my RRSP and a TFSA I was proud of. My parents had always struggled financially. My dad worked in manufacturing until his plant closed in 2018, and he never quite landed on his feet after that. My mom worked part-time at a pharmacy, but the hours got cut. I understood this. I wanted to help. At first it was small, 100 here, groceries there, covering their phone plan, because it was easier than watching them stress about it. But somewhere along the way, small became something else. It started with Ryan's wedding in 2022. He'd been with his girlfriend for 3 years, proposed at Niagara-on-the-Lake, which, fine, beautiful, romantic. The wedding they planned was 140 guests, a venue in Muskoka, a 4-piece band, and a rehearsal dinner at a restaurant in the Distillery District that cost more per head than my monthly grocery budget. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table in Hamilton and explained, very calmly, very reasonably, that they couldn't cover it. They'd helped Ryan with the deposit, but the rest was beyond him. "We're not asking you to pay for everything," my mom said. "Just help us bridge the gap." The gap turned out to be $19,000. I want you to sit with that number for a second. $19,000. That was my emergency fund. That was 2 years of careful, disciplined saving. I transferred it to my parents' account the week before the wedding and watched my financial cushion disappear in a single transaction. I told myself it was a gift. I told myself it was what family does. Ryan thanked me at the reception, briefly. A toast where he named about 15 people, and I was near the end of the list, between his college roommate and the family dog, who had died in 2019 but was apparently still more top of mind than the person who just funded a significant chunk of his open bar. After that, the requests didn't stop. They evolved. Property taxes, a new furnace for my parents' house because the old one finally gave out in February. I do not begrudge that one. February in Ontario is not a moral debate. You need heat. Ryan and his wife's first car, which they needed urgently and would definitely pay back, they didn't. A trip to Portugal my parents had always wanted to take, which I funded in installments over 8 months. My sister-in-law's dental work, which for reasons I still don't fully understand, became my problem. Another trip? This one a cruise out of Montreal. Over 4 years, I had given my family approximately $67,000. I know the exact number because I kept a spreadsheet, not out of resentment, at least not at first, but because I was an accountant and tracking numbers was just how my brain worked. $67,000 in Canada, where I was also paying Toronto rent, Toronto taxes, Toronto everything. I had stopped contributing to my TFSA in 2023. I told myself I'd catch up later. There is no catching up. There is only the money you didn't save when you had the chance. Anyway, back to the ICU. On the third day, I was well enough to sit up and eat something that wasn't through a tube. Patricia came back. She brought a card that my whole team had signed and a container of my favorite soup from the place near our office, roasted tomato, from the Italian spot on King Street. She sat across from my bed and looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the look of someone who had been worried for a long time and was only now allowing herself to show it. "Lily," she said, "how long have you been running like this?" I didn't answer right away because I didn't know how to answer honestly without crying. "A while," I finally said. "You've been logging 12, 13-hour days since January. There was a lot to do. There's always a lot to do." She paused. "I called your parents. Your father answered this time." Something went still inside me. What did he say? He said they'd try to cut the trip short if it got worse, but that the resort had a no-refund policy on the last few days. I nodded slowly. I looked at the window. It was raining outside, that specific gray Toronto spring rain that feels less like weather and more like a mood. I thought about the $2,300 I had transferred the morning I collapsed. I thought about the no-refund policy that apparently applied to family vacations, but not to their daughter in the intensive care unit. "Okay," I said. Patricia left after an hour. She squeezed my shoulder, same as Deb did, and told me not to come back until Dr. Darple. Chen signed off and that my job was safe and my projects were being covered. After she left, I sat in the quiet and thought about what I wanted. Not what my parents wanted. Not what Ryan needed. What I wanted. I wanted to go home. I wanted to sleep in my own bed. I wanted someone to bring me tea without me having to ask. I wanted to matter to someone in a way that wasn't conditional on my bank account balance. I wanted my mom, but she was in Cancun. 7 days passed. The nurses became familiar. Deb had a daughter at Ryerson studying nursing, following in her footsteps, and she was quietly proud of this in the way that people are proud of things they've worked hard for. There was a night shift nurse named Greg who hummed to himself when he checked the monitors and always apologized for waking me even when I wasn't asleep. The woman in the next bay, we couldn't see each other, but we could hear, was named something like Claudette, and her husband came every single visiting hour, every single day, and he'd read to her from what sounded like a mystery novel in a low, steady voice. And I would lie there and listen to the shape of it without catching the words, and it was the most comforting sound I heard that whole week. My parents came back on day 8. My mom walked in wearing a floral cover-up over a sundress, her skin brown from the Yucatan sun, a small straw hat that she'd clearly bought at a resort gift shop. She looked rested. She looked rested. She looked good. She stopped short when she saw me. The IV stand, the monitor, whatever my face was doing, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart." I didn't say anything. My dad stood behind her in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable. He'd gotten a haircut down there, I noticed. A fresh haircut. "We came as soon as we landed," my mom said. "The flight was this morning," I said. "Scheduled." A pause. "Well, we couldn't change it, the no refund policy." "I know." She pulled a chair to my bedside. She took my hand. Her skin was warm from the sun, and I let her hold my hand because I was tired and because some part of me, the part that still wanted my mom, needed the contact even when the rest of me was somewhere far away, behind glass, watching this happen to someone else. "You should have told us it was this serious," she said. "I was unconscious." "Before, you should have told us you were this stressed." I looked at her. I looked at my father, who had moved to the window and was looking out at the same gray rain. And I thought about every conversation I'd had with them over the past year. The ones where I'd mentioned being tired and heard back a request for money. The one where I'd said I was feeling burned out, and my mother had pivoted immediately to asking whether I thought Ryan and his wife needed a new washer-dryer because the one they had was making a noise. "I did tell you," I said quietly. "You just didn't hear it." They left after an hour. My dad had something he needed to do at home. Something about the car. And my mom said she needed to unpack, but she'd be back tomorrow, and she was. She came back the next morning with a Tim Hortons bag and a kind of bright, compensatory energy that I recognized. The energy of someone who knew they'd done something wrong and was trying to paper over it with muffins and normalcy. While she was organizing the muffins on the bedside table, a nurse I hadn't met yet came in to update the visitor log. A routine thing. She flipped through it, made a note, and was about to leave when my mom glanced over. "Can I see that?" The nurse paused. "The visitor log? Yes, I want to know who's been here." She handed it over without thinking much of it. I watched my mother's face as she read. I watched her go through the entries from the first day, Patricia, a couple of colleagues, and then continue through the days that followed. I watched her expression shift, tighten. Her hand gripped the clipboard a little harder. "Who is this?" she said. She turned it toward me. She was pointing at a name that appeared every night, not every day, every night. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Sometimes 10 p.m. The same name, the same signature. 7 nights in a row while I was unconscious, and then waking up, and then learning to sit up again. The name was Edmund Walsh. I had no idea who that was. I asked Deb about it the next time she came in. She remembered him. Of course she did. He'd been there every night. "Quiet man," she said. "Maybe mid-60s. Always brought a book, but mostly just sat. Never asked for anything. Signed in. Stayed his hour. Signed out." She paused. "He cried, the first night. Quietly. I brought him a cup of tea, and he thanked me like I'd handed him something precious." I thought about that. A man I didn't know, sitting in the chair beside my bed while I was unconscious, crying quietly, thanking a nurse for a cup of tea. Did he say anything? About who he was? Deb shook her head. Only that he was family. My mother had gone very quiet. She was still standing by the window with the clipboard in her hands, and she looked like someone who'd opened a door they'd spent a long time keeping shut. "Mom," I said, "who is Edmund Walsh?" She didn't answer right away. She set the clipboard down on the table like it was something she was afraid to hold anymore. She sat down in the chair he'd been sitting in every night, and she folded her hands in her lap and looked at them. "That's complicated," she said. "I have time," I said. "I'm literally in a hospital bed." She looked up. And then, for the first time in I don't know how long, maybe ever, she told me the truth. I was not my father's biological daughter. This was the thing she'd kept for 31 years. She and my dad. The man I'd called Dad my whole life. The man whose last name I carried. Had been together since high school. They'd broken up briefly in their mid-20s, a rough stretch, and during that gap she had met someone else. Edmund Walsh, an engineer from Guelph. They dated for 8 months. She got pregnant. By the time she knew, she and my dad were back together, and she made a decision. A private, terrified, 24-year-old's decision to not tell anyone. He knew, she said. Edmund knew. He found out later. I told him I owed him that. But we agreed to let it be. He was building his life. He respected the choice. But he came, I said. He always. She stopped, pressed her lips together. He always kept track, from a distance. He came to your graduation. Your high school one, I mean. He didn't approach us. She made a vague gesture. He just was there. I thought about a man standing at the edge of a high school graduation, watching a girl cross a stage to get a diploma, knowing she was his and choosing not to disrupt her life. I thought about 7 nights in an ICU, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, sometimes 10. A book he mostly didn't read. A cup of tea from a nurse named Deb. How did he know I was here? I asked. My mother looked away. I think I may have posted something on Facebook. When I was worried, before we left, just that you weren't well. I didn't think. She didn't finish the sentence. I asked the nursing staff to pass along a message if he came that night. Just 3 words, I'm awake. Please stay. He came at 8033. He was exactly as Deb had described, mid-60s, quiet, with the kind of face that had been through things and was no longer surprised by difficulty. He stood in the doorway for a moment when he saw me sitting up, and I watched something move across his face that I didn't have a name for then and still don't entirely now. Relief and grief at the same time. An opening. Lily, he said, like he'd said it before, privately, many times. Hi, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. He came in. He sat down. He had his book, a worn paperback. I couldn't see the title, and he set it on his knee without opening it. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. No one cried, though I came close a few times and I think he did too. He told me about himself, the engineering firm, the house in Guelph, his 2 kids from a marriage that had ended amicably years ago. He told me he'd driven to Toronto and sat in the waiting room the night I was admitted, not knowing if he had any right to be there, deciding eventually that he didn't care about his rights. He just needed to know I was alive. I wasn't going to introduce myself, he said. I needed to be here. Why didn't you ever, before this? He was quiet for a moment. Because your mother asked me not to, and because I was... He looked at his hands. I was afraid that you'd be angry, that I'd disrupt something, that you had a father and didn't need a stranger showing up claiming the title. She was in Cancun, I said. My dad was in Cancun. You were here. He nodded. Just once. He didn't make anything of it, and that restraint, that refusal to score points against my parents, told me something about him that I've thought about many times since. Before he left, I asked if he'd come back. He said he would if I wanted him to. I said I did. I was discharged 4 days later. Dr. Chen gave me a significant talking to about stress management, blood pressure, sleep, and what he called sustainable living pace, a phrase that I found both clinical and devastating in how accurately it described what I hadn't been doing. He adjusted my medication, referred me to a therapist who specialized in burnout, and told me plainly that the next episode could be worse. Your body sent you a message, he said. I'd listened to it. My parents drove me home. My mom had packed up my apartment a little, done some dishes, put a vase of flowers on the table that I immediately recognized as the kind you buy at the gas station on the 401 when you run out of better options. She made tea. My dad fixed something with the bathroom tap that had been dripping for months, which he'd never offered to do before. It was kindness, and I received it, and I also understood that it was the kindness of people who felt guilty, and were expressing it in the only currency they had. We didn't talk about Edmund that day, or the next. But about a week after I got home, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and a real cup of good coffee that I'd bought myself from the Ethiopian place on Gerrard, I pulled up a number I'd gotten from the nursing station. He answered on the second ring. We talked for an hour. Then we made plans to meet for dinner the following Saturday at a Thai place in Guelph he said was the best he'd ever found, which I thought was a very specific recommendation for a first proper meeting and which made me like him immediately. Here's what I did not do. When I got out of the hospital, I did not immediately call my family and deliver a speech. I didn't cut anyone off dramatically. I didn't send a long text. Life is not a movie, and I have found that the most satisfying changes are the ones that happen quietly in your own kitchen, in decisions that no one else witnesses. I opened a new TFSA and set up an automatic contribution for the first of every month. Not a lot, what I could manage, but it was mine, and it was happening, and no one was going to ask me to redirect it for a resort deposit. I told my mother in a single calm phone conversation that I would no longer be transferring money to cover non-emergency expenses. I didn't list everything I'd given over the years. I didn't itemize or explain or justify. I just said, this is no longer something I'm able to do. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she understood. I don't know if she does, but she hasn't asked since, and that's enough for now. Ryan called me a month later to ask if I could help with a home equity situation he and his wife were navigating. I told him no, it wasn't something I could do, and that I hoped they found a good solution. He sounded surprised. He called back 2 days later to say he understood and to ask with what felt like genuine sincerity how I was doing. It was the first time he'd called just to ask that in years. Maybe that's something. Maybe it's not. I'm choosing to let it be something. Edmund and I meet for dinner every few weeks now, sometimes in Guelph, sometimes in Toronto. He is not trying to be my father. He's made that clear, and I appreciate it. He's trying to know me. That's a different thing, and, I think, the more honest thing. I'm learning who he is, the way he talks about his work, the fact that he grew up in Sudbury and has a complicated love for Northern Ontario winters, the photographs he takes on his phone, nature stuff mostly. Trails and frozen lakes, and once a fox he almost walked into on a path near his house. He has 2 half-siblings I might meet someday. I'm not in a rush. My half-siblings. That's still a strange sentence to try on. A few months ago, I was cleaning out a drawer and found the spreadsheet I'd kept, the one tracking everything I'd transferred to my family over the years. $67,420. I looked at it for a while. Then I thought about what it would have been, compounded, invested, in a market that's been doing reasonably okay despite everything. I thought about what that TFSA could have looked like, what my emergency fund could have been, what my options might have felt like. And then I closed the spreadsheet. Not to make peace with it. I'm not sure I've made peace with it. But because I'm 31 years old and I have a lot of earning years ahead of me, and I know now, finally, completely, in a way that lives in my body and not just my head, that the person I need to protect first is myself. My body sent me a message. I listened. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a man I didn't know drove to Toronto in the rain, signed his name on a clipboard every night for 7 nights, sat in a chair beside my bed, and waited for me to wake up. I didn't know I needed saving. It turns out the person who saved me wasn't the one I would have expected. But that's family, sometimes. Not the people who were there from the beginning. The people who show up when it counts. I keep thinking about that clipboard. A standard hospital visitor log, the kind nobody pays attention to. The kind that just sits at the front desk and gets initialed by nurses on shift change. Nobody plans for it to become the thing that changes everything. But that's usually how it goes. The truth doesn't arrive with a dramatic speech. It shows up quietly in the small records of who actually came. Edmund signed his name 7 nights in a row. He didn't call ahead. He didn't ask permission. He just drove from Guelph to Toronto and sat in a chair beside my bed and waited. That kind of integrity. Showing up for someone when it costs you something. When no one asked you to, when you have every reason to stay home. That's not something you can fake. It's not something you arrive at by accident either. It's built slowly, over years of small choices that nobody sees. He'd been making those choices for 31 years. And my mother, I don't think she's a villain. I've had to work hard not to flatten her into one, because it would be easier if she were. But she was a frightened 24-year-old who made a decision she thought she could contain and then spent 3 decades managing the consequences of it instead of facing them. That's what happens when you choose comfort over honesty. Not once, but every single day afterward. The weight of it doesn't shrink. It compounds. By the time she was standing in my hospital room holding that clipboard, the truth had been accumulating interest for 31 years, and it collected all at once. I spent a long time being the person who held things together by making herself smaller. I thought that was what loyalty looked like. I thought giving money, time, energy, sleep was how you proved you were worth keeping. What I understand now is that I wasn't being loyal. I was being afraid. Afraid that if I said no, I'd lose them. Afraid that without my usefulness, I didn't have a place. That fear made me a good ATM and a poor advocate for myself, and the gap between those two things nearly killed me. What I've learned, what I'm still learning, honestly, because it doesn't arrive all at once, is that real clarity takes courage. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet, unglamorous kind where you sit at your kitchen table and set up an automatic transfer to your own savings account and let that be enough of a statement. Where you say, no, I can't do that without a paragraph of justification. Where you understand that you are allowed to be a full person, not just a function. Edmund is teaching me some of this without meaning to. The way he asks questions and then actually waits for the answer. The way he talks about his work with the kind of steady persistence that comes from someone who decided early on what mattered and didn't deviate. He didn't give up on the idea of knowing me. He just waited until I was ready. That kind of quiet endurance, not passive, not resigned, but genuinely patient, is something I want more of in my own life. I'm 31. I have time to rebuild what I gave away. I have time to be someone who shows up for others, yes, but for myself first. Someone whose name, if it ever appeared on a visitor log, would mean something real. That's what I'm working toward. One small, unglamorous choice at a time.